We are witnessing something that should terrify anyone who understands great power politics. Russian naval vessels have just arrived in Venezuelan waters, not for a friendly port visit. This is Moscow's direct challenge to the Monroe Doctrine, the 200-year-old cornerstone of American dominance in the Western Hemisphere. I've spent decades studying how empires rise and fall. What I'm seeing unfold in the Caribbean right now is the clearest signal yet that the American-dominated unipolar world is collapsing before our eyes. When Russian destroyers anchor off the coast of South America, they're announcing that the age of unchallenged American hegemony is over, forever. This moment didn't happen in a vacuum. It's the inevitable consequence of 30 years of catastrophic American foreign policy decisions that have pushed Russia into the arms of our adversaries and turned potential partners into sworn enemies. The story begins in the 1990s. We had won the Cold War. Russia was weak, desperate for Western integration. Instead of welcoming Russia into a new European security architecture, we chose expansion. NATO began its relentless march eastward: Poland, Hungary, Czech Republic, then the Baltic states. Each expansion brought American military infrastructure closer to Moscow's doorstep. George Kennan warned us. The architect of Cold War containment called NATO expansion the most fateful error of American policy in the entire post-Cold War era. He understood what Washington refused to accept, that any Russian government would view NATO's advance as an existential threat. But we didn't listen. We were drunk on our own power, convinced that history had ended and American dominance was permanent. The turning point came in 2008 at the NATO summit in Bucharest. American officials announced that Ukraine and Georgia would eventually join the alliance. For Russia, this was the red line. Ukraine isn't just another neighboring country to Moscow. It's the historical heartland of Russian civilization. We pressed forward anyway. The consequences came in 2014. Russia annexed Crimea and intervened in eastern Ukraine. Instead of recognizing this as the predictable response to NATO expansion, Washington doubled down. More sanctions, more isolation, more pressure. This is where Venezuela enters the story. As we escalated confrontation with Russia in Europe, Moscow began looking for ways to pressure us elsewhere. They found the perfect opportunity in our own backyard. Venezuela, under Hugo Chavez, had already become a thorn in Washington's side. Chavez's crime wasn't authoritarianism. We've supported plenty of dictators when it served our interests. His crime was independence. He dared to use Venezuelan oil wealth to fund social programs instead of enriching American corporations. Our response was predictable: sanctions. In 2002, we backed a coup attempt against Chavez. When that failed, we turned to economic warfare. We've imposed the most comprehensive sanctions regime in modern history outside of wartime. The results have been catastrophic. Venezuela's economy has collapsed by over 75%. Millions have fled the country. Children are dying of preventable diseases. And American officials describe this suffering as necessary pressure to promote democracy. But here's what Washington never understood. Economic warfare creates desperation, and desperate nations make desperate alliances. Every sanction we imposed on Venezuela pushed Caracas deeper into Moscow's embrace. We didn't just fail to achieve regime change, we handed Russia a strategic foothold in our hemisphere. Now, Russian naval vessels patrol Caribbean waters that America has considered its private lake since the 19th century. Russian military advisors train Venezuelan forces. Russian weapon systems defend Venezuelan airspace. This isn't happening because Nicolas Maduro is a Russian puppet. It's happening because we gave him no choice. The parallels to our Eastern European policy are exact. In both cases, we use pressure to force compliance. In both cases, our targets sought security partnerships with our rivals. In both cases, our actions created the very threats we claim to be preventing. But there's a crucial difference. NATO expansion threatened Russian security interests thousands of miles from American territory. The Russian naval presence in Venezuela threatens American security interests in our own hemisphere. This is the security dilemma in action. NATO expansion triggered Russian countermeasures. Our sanctions on Venezuela triggered Russian involvement in the Caribbean. The tragedy is that none of this was inevitable. We could have chosen integration over isolation. Instead, we chose dominance, and dominance has consequences. Today, those consequences are anchored off the Venezuelan coast. Russian Admiral Gorshkov frigate, equipped with hypersonic missiles capable of reaching American cities. Russian submarines prowling waters where American naval supremacy was once absolute. The Monroe Doctrine, established in 1823, declared that European powers would not be allowed to interfere in the Americas. For 2 centuries, no major power has challenged American primacy in the Western Hemisphere. That era is now over. Russia's naval presence in Venezuela represents the first serious challenge to the Monroe Doctrine since the Cuban Missile Crisis. But unlike 1962, Russia isn't placing missiles in the Caribbean. They're establishing a permanent strategic partnership with a sovereign government that we've driven into their arms. What Russia has accomplished in Venezuela is a masterstroke of geopolitical positioning. They've established a forward operating base in America's hemisphere at virtually no cost. We spent trillions trying to impose our will in Iraq and Afghanistan. Russia gained a strategic foothold in our backyard simply by offering friendship to a country we chose to treat as an enemy. From Moscow's perspective, this is symmetrical containment. Just as NATO expansion brought Western military infrastructure to Russia's borders, Russian naval deployments bring Eastern military capabilities to America's borders. But the Venezuelan situation reveals something deeper about the changing nature of international power. America's primary tool of coercion has become economic warfare. We use our control of the global financial system to punish disobedient nations. We weaponize the dollar's reserve currency status to impose our will. This approach has created what intelligence analysts call blowback. Every nation we sanction learns the dangers of dependence on American-controlled systems. They begin building alternatives, alternative payment systems, alternative trade networks, alternative security partnerships. China and Russia have developed bilateral payment mechanisms that bypass the dollar. What we're witnessing is the gradual construction of a parallel international system that operates beyond American control. Venezuela's partnership with Russia is a perfect example. Unable to access international capital markets because of American sanctions, Venezuela turned to Russian investment. Unable to sell oil through traditional channels, Venezuela developed alternative export routes through Russian networks. Each American pressure tactic created a new incentive for deeper Russian-Venezuelan cooperation. We didn't just fail to achieve our objectives, we actively undermined them. This is strategic incompetence on a historic scale. If the United States cannot maintain dominance in its own hemisphere, how can it hope to contain rivals in Europe or Asia? If American sanctions drive allies into the arms of enemies, how sustainable is our global position? The United States maintains global dominance through 3 key mechanisms: military supremacy, financial control, and alliance networks. All 3 are now under stress. Military supremacy is increasingly expensive. The wars in Iraq and Afghanistan cost over $2 trillion and ended in strategic failure. Financial control faces challenges from emerging alternative systems. Alliance networks are fraying under competing national interests. The Venezuelan case illustrates all 3 trends. Our military threats failed to intimidate a much weaker nation. Our financial weapons pushed the target into alternative economic relationships. Our alliance pressure backfired. This is how empires decline. Not through dramatic military defeat, but through the gradual erosion of their power. Today's alternatives to American dominance speak Russian and Chinese. They offer sanctions-free trade, judgment-free investment, and sovereignty-respecting partnerships. Venezuela represents something historically unprecedented, a nation in America's hemisphere that has successfully resisted American pressure for over 2 decades. Despite sanctions, isolation, and regime change attempts, the Maduro government survives. This success sends a message to every other nation in the region. American dominance is not inevitable. Resistance is possible. The giant to the north can be defied. Venezuelan defiance has exposed the emptiness of American threats. What exactly can we do to a nation that has already been sanctioned to the maximum extent possible? We've tried economic warfare, political isolation, and military intimidation. None of it worked. If the United States cannot coerce an economically devastated nation with a population smaller than Texas, how credible are our threats against major powers like China and Russia? Our credibility as a global hegemon depends on the perception that American power is irresistible. Venezuela has shattered that perception. Every day, Maduro remains in office, despite American opposition, demonstrates the limits of our influence. But the real tragedy isn't strategic, it's human. Conservative estimates suggest that over 100,000 Venezuelans have died as a direct result of sanctions-induced economic collapse. Millions more have fled the country. American officials have been remarkably honest about their intentions. John Bolton explicitly said the goal was to make the Venezuelan economy scream. This language reveals the moral bankruptcy at the heart of American policy. We're not promoting democracy, we're weaponizing suffering. From a realist perspective, Venezuelan sanctions serve no meaningful American interest. They don't enhance our security or advance our global position. They do the opposite. They create instability and drive a regional power into the arms of our rivals. The only beneficiaries of our Venezuelan policy are Russia, China, and Iran. Every day we maintain sanctions is another day these powers gain influence in our hemisphere. This psychological dimension explains why the Russian naval presence in Venezuela is so threatening to American elites. It's not primarily a military threat, it's a symbolic threat to our self-conception as the indispensable nation. For 30 years, we've told ourselves that American leadership is necessary for global stability. The Russian ships anchored off Venezuela tell a different story, that American leadership creates instability, that our interventions cause suffering. These changes are coming whether we accept them or not. The unipolar moment is ending. A multipolar world is emerging. The question isn't whether American dominance will decline, but how we'll manage that decline. We can resist the transition, clinging to failing strategies until they collapse under their own weight. This path leads to more conflicts like Venezuela, more humanitarian disasters like our sanctions regimes. Or we can adapt to changing realities, developing new approaches based on mutual respect rather than dominance. This requires abandoning the illusion of control and embracing genuine multilateralism. The Venezuelan crisis offers a perfect opportunity to test this new approach. Instead of deepening sanctions, we could begin diplomatic engagement. Instead of supporting regime change, we could respect Venezuelan sovereignty. The Russian naval forces now patrolling Caribbean waters represent more than a tactical challenge. They represent a historical transition. The question isn't how to restore American dominance, but how to build sustainable relationships in a multipolar world. Time is running out. Every day we maintain failed policies is another day our rivals gain strength. Every month we refuse to adapt is another month the world moves beyond our control. The Russian ships off Venezuela aren't just a crisis. They're a warning. They're telling us that the world has changed while we weren't paying attention. They're offering us a final opportunity to change course before it's too late. Because if we're not wise enough to listen, those ships are just the beginning. The future will bring more challenges to American dominance, more alternatives to American leadership, more evidence that our unipolar moment has passed into history. The choice, as always, is ours, but the consequences belong to everyone. And right now, those consequences are anchored off the coast of Venezuela, flying Russian flags, and carrying missiles that can reach American cities.